fourth grade. It's good to see you on this rainy and cold Tuesday. I'm coming to you from my living room today, mostly just because Colin is not home. He's been working in our living room, and I usually make my videos in our kitchen, but I wanted to come in here today because I could. So that's good. Before I talk to you about our little virtual lesson today, I wanted to mention two things I've had on my mind. You need a little bit of time to plan and prepare. So I wanted to remind you that 2 Sundays from now, it's a very special day. You know what that is? It's Mother's Day. So I want you to be thinking of some things that you can do to honor your mom. If we were in school together, we would do some things with you, but we really can't do that. So you need to plan ahead. So think of what you can do to make Mother's Day really special for your mom. And I want you to start thinking of those things. A lot of times I've had my kids write their mom a letter just to tell them how much she means to them. Sometimes we've even written an essay about our moms and just expressed how much we love her and thanks for all the wonderful things she's done for you. And it doesn't have to be just your mom. You think about your grandma, think about your stepmoms, think about your aunts, think of special women in your lives that you would like to honor. So I just think it's a good idea with that coming up in like 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to plan. So plan and see what you can come up with to make it a really nice special day for those special women in your lives. Make sure you tell your mom how much you love her, okay? So Mother's Day. The other thing I wanted to mention to you that next week is Teacher Appreciation Week. And right now, obviously, you're being homeschooled by some wonderful, wonderful people who love you very dearly. So next week, I'd like for you to also think of some things you can do to honor your mom and your dad and those adults at home who right now are your primary teachers. Think of some activities that you could do maybe as a family just to say thank you to them for all that they're doing for you. Because you know what, guys? They are doing a lot. A lot of them are working all day long, and then they come home and they school you and they help you with your math and your reading and your social studies. And they're, they didn't ask to be put in that position, but that's where they are. So what can you do to tell your family how much you appreciate all the things that they're teaching you right now? So, just a couple ideas. Maybe you could plan a special dinner for your parents and just to say thank you, where you plan the menu. Obviously, they buy the food, but you tell them what to put on the grocery list and you plan the menu and you cook it and then you clean up after. That's an idea. Maybe you might plan a special picnic with your family. We can't really go out to restaurants right now, besides getting takeout, which is always fun, but you can do picnics. So maybe plan a nice weather day, take them on a picnic and just say thank you again for all they're doing for you. Maybe, and what you do for them actually doesn't have to cost any money at all. Maybe spend some extra time cleaning up your room. Maybe you can clean the house without being asked. Maybe you can take out the trash or do some special chores. Maybe while we're at home, maybe you might want to think about, we've talked a lot about plants with me. Maybe you might want to plan out your garden together. And maybe if you already have a garden, you could go out and help your parents weed it or something like that. But just some ideas, think of things that you could do to just tell your parents how very much you appreciate all that they're doing for you right now. Some of them are outside their comfort zones, and I know others are very comfortable with what they're doing. But make sure you take the time to say thank you, because they are doing a lot for you, because they love you. All right, so that being said, let's move to what you are doing today. This week, you're pulling out this book, which I know we didn't really use when you were in my classroom. We had it, I gave it to you early in the year, but we didn't really use it a lot. But since we couldn't put packets together for you, I thought this would be a good thing to pull out and have you get out and use. And it gives you things to read about our state and about our country's history and about our government. And it would just be a good resource for you. So today I asked you to do page 10. And page 10 deals with the Declaration of Independence. Okay, now I hope you remember what the Declaration of Independence is, because we talked about it in my class. In fact, we read about the Declaration of Independence and we talked about the Articles of Confederation. Earlier, it was in the fall. If you remember, we made a thinking map. You had to make a circle map. About half of you did the Declaration of Independence. Half of you did the Articles of Confederation. We did the Constitution. Oh, sorry, you didn't do the Declaration of Independence. You did the Constitution, and you did the Articles of Confederation. The Declaration of Independence led up to the Constitution eventually. Constitution was written after the War for Independence was won, obviously. But we spent some time, we talked about that. So today I'd like to share with you some information from this book called The Signers. And we would be looking at this together if we were in class. So I thought we can go ahead and do it here virtually from home. So this is a book about the 56 stories behind the Declaration of Independence. And then it's kind of cool because it tells the story of each of the men who signed the Declaration, and tells Thomas Jefferson's story. Thomas Jefferson was the one who drafted the Declaration of Independence. This little doll represents Thomas Jefferson. My mom always liked him because he's a redhead, and my family were redheads. But Thomas Jefferson was a very gifted writer. So he was our nation's third president. But that's Mr. Jefferson. When I was a little girl, we went to Monticello, which is his home, and we toured his plantation, and we saw the things that he had written and invented, and that was a really neat thing. His home of Monticello is in Virginia. If you ever get a chance to go there, it's a neat thing to see. But anyway, this is Thomas Jefferson. Right here, I bet you know who this is. Who's that? Father of our country, George Washington, right? Okay, and then this man who's actually holding the Constitution, not the Declaration of Independence, but this represents Benjamin Franklin. You can tell him by his little spectacles. Benjamin Franklin was the oldest man to attend the Constitutional Convention. And he did a lot of wonderful work for our country. I'm going to bring my camera up and focus on these guys rather than me while I share with you some of the story about the signers. Americans celebrate Independence Day each July 4th because of a document that was adopted on July 4th, 1776. This paper, which announced that the 13 colonies had separated from England and had become the United States of America, has been called the nation's birth certificate. Upon hearing about it, George Washington said that he hoped the document would inspire his troops to win the war for independence against England. The paper's stirring words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal," have inspired Americans in war and in peace for nearly 2.5 centuries. This document, of course, is the Declaration of Independence. Its roots go back to the 1760s and early 1770s when England taxed the 13 colonies on tea and other items. In 1774, American leaders gathered in Philadelphia at what was called the First Continental Congress to discuss their grievances. The troubles grew worse. In April 1775, war between the 13 colonies in England erupted at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. A month later, American leaders met again in Philadelphia. When the Second Continental Congress opened in Philadelphia in May 1775, most Americans still hoped that peace would soon be made and that the 13 colonies would return to British rule. But the war escalated, and by the spring of 1776, growing numbers of Americans were considering independence. By then, it had become clear that taxes weren't the only issue. Having lived for generations 3,000 miles from England, Americans had begun to feel like a separate people. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee, a delegate from Virginia, arose in Congress and read a proposal. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. Many of the delegates were thunderstruck by Lee's proposal. They had discussed separating from England in private, but hearing the words independent states formally presented in Congress was startling. Besides, declaring independence would be the easy part. Actually winning it from the world's most powerful country might be close to impossible. Wanting a few weeks to ponder Richard Henry Lee's independence proposal, the congressmen delayed the vote on it until early July. Should the vote come out for separation from England, they realized they would need a paper explaining their action. A 5-man committee composed of John Adams of Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Robert R. Livingston of New York, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, and Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, was asked to produce a paper explaining why America was declaring independence. The committee entrusted the writing to Jefferson. The tall, red-headed Virginian wrote the Declaration in about 2 weeks in his Philadelphia lodgings. Jefferson showed the paper to Franklin and Adams, who made a few changes. For example, Franklin improved Jefferson's phrase, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable," to "We hold these truths to be self-evident." The Declaration would only be needed if the independence measure passed. Each colony had formed a wartime government that had sent delegates to Congress. If a colony had 5 delegates in Congress, 3 had to vote for independence for that colony to choose separation from England. 7 colonies out of 13, a majority, had to vote for independence for the proposal to be approved. Thomas Jefferson estimated that as of June 1776, 6 colonies were not yet ready for independence. If just one pro-independence colony changed its vote, the measure would be defeated. But the men who favored independence knew that having 7 or even 12 colonies vote for separation from England wouldn't be good enough. For how could a new nation survive with 1 or more colonies still loyal to England? Unless the vote was unanimous, the colonies would end up fighting each other. On July 1st, the day before the official vote, Congress debated the issue and took a trial vote. The results showed movement toward independence, with 9 colonies now favoring the measure. South Carolina and Pennsylvania were opposed. Delaware was stuck in a tie, with 1 delegate for independence, 1 against, and its third delegate, Independence man Caesar Rodney, 80 miles away in Delaware. New York's delegates had been instructed by their leaders back home not to vote one way or the other on independence. An amazing series of events occurred over the next 24 hours. Informed by a messenger that he was desperately needed in Philadelphia, Caesar Rodney mounted his horse and headed to the city. Meanwhile, Samuel Adams of Massachusetts and a few other independence men convinced some delegates who were undecided or opposed that all the colonies must stand together. When the official vote was made on July 2nd, everything fell into place. 2 Pennsylvanians who opposed independence, John Dickinson and Robert Morris, abstained from voting. That means they didn't vote. This allowed Pennsylvania to squeak by for independence with the slimmest of margins, 3 votes to 2. Wet and exhausted from his all-night ride, Caesar Rodney arrived just in time to swing Delaware's vote to independence. Not wanting theirs to be the only colony against the measure, the South Carolinians switched to independence. And although its delegates did not vote on July 2nd, New York made the independence vote unanimous several days later. The July 2nd vote transformed the American colonies into the United States of America. The delegates expected that July 2nd would be honored as the new nation's birthday. John Adams wrote his wife, Abigail, that he believed Americans would celebrate July 2nd as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, bells, bonfires, from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore. But what happened was that after making more changes, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. Copies of the Declaration were sent to the 13 states, as the former colonies were now known. American patriots loved the Declaration, and because at the top of the document it said that the Declaration had been approved on July 4th, 1776, Americans began thinking of July 4th instead of July 2nd as the nation's birthday. This misconception about the day the United States was born has continued to the present time. Another widespread misconception is that all the congressmen signed the Declaration on July 4th, 1776. Most historians think that only John Hancock and Charles Thomson, the President and Secretary of Congress, signed that day. It appears that the full Congress didn't sign a copy of the document until later. Most of the delegates signed this copy on August 2nd. Hey, that's my birthday. Cool. 1776. And others signed even later. On January 18th, 1777, Mary Catherine Goddard, editor and publisher of the Maryland Journal and Baltimore Advertiser, became the first person to publish the full declaration, including all the signers' names. The fact that the Declaration was approved on July 4th, but not signed by most members of Congress till about a month later, meant that those who voted for independence were not the identical group of men who signed the document. About a quarter of the 56 signers had not been in Congress at the time of the vote. For example, Richard Henry Lee was called back to Virginia in mid-June of 1776. As a result, Lee missed the vote for his own independence proposal, but he returned to Congress in late August and signed the Declaration. The signers of the Declaration, rather than those who voted for independence, have long been honored as the nation's founders. That is because by placing their names on the Declaration, they announced to the world their willingness to risk everything for the cause of independence. The British targeted the 56 signers for special punishment. The homes of 12 signers were burned, and nearly 20 of them lost much of what they owned. According to some estimates, 9 signers died as a result of hardships they suffered during the Revolution. Yet, not one signer changed his stance on independence. All of them kept the promise they had made in the Declaration of Independence, that they would stake their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor on their country's cause. And once again, that came from the signers, the 56 stories behind the Declaration of Independence, written by Dennis Brendel Fraden, and illustrations by Michael McCurdy. So today, let me move my camera back. So today, as you are working through your work about the Declaration of Independence, I want you to remember how the 56 signers really were risking everything that they owned, everything that was important to them, by putting their name on that document. Do you remember the story of John Hancock? John Hancock wrote his name really big at the top. He wanted everyone to know. He wanted the king to be able to read it without his glasses, legend says. He wanted everyone to know that he totally supported independence of the colonies. In fact, today, your signature is known as your John Hancock. Some people call it that because of him. I have a little trivia question that I would like for you to see if you can find the answer to. So what about this guy? I didn't mention him in anything that I read to you today, but I put him out here because he's father of our country. He's George Washington, of course. Did George Washington sign the Declaration of Independence? That's what I'd like for you to look up and find out for me. And I'd like for you to answer it in the comments when you get an answer. Okay, was George Washington one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence? All right. Happy learning about the birth document, the birth certificate of our country. And I'll talk to you later.